Welcome to Kingdom of the Logos, a Christian program of critical thinking and adventure produced by clergy in the Church of the Nazarene. I'm Anthony Allegria.
And I'm J. Dylan Proctor. And Anthony is here to bring us a message about Cain and Abel. And, well, I won't give away too much of the theme. I'll let him answer for it himself.
If there's one thing I'd like for you to remember about Cain and Abel, it's don't be the exception. Moving on into the story of Cain and Abel, we need to understand the context in which it sits. They are in the fall, just as we are. The world after the Garden of Eden, a disordered world that has been broken, one where the natural order and relationships that were established by God from the beginning have been destroyed and removed. God has always been in the business of blessing things and to sanctifying them, making them holy. This is a huge and heavy part of the redemption God offers. God, in the beginning, before sin was ever around, he was sanctifying us, turning us dust and mold and clay into humanity which was in the image of God, literally bringing us closer to God. And so, after the fall, there is the redemption that God offers even there. Instead of leaving us to our own devices, the clothes that we make out of the fig leaves, he gives us great and awesome clothes of skin, ones that we can tackle nature with. And so, God is in the business of blessing and sanctifying his creation. In many ways, Cain and Abel, they are the first people. But Dylan, did you have something that you wanted to say about the clothing?
Well, no, I was just going to talk a little bit about sanctifying and redemption. They're not exactly the same concept. It can easily be a quick movement to sort of equate the two. A lot of times we live in a day and age where people don't use words as independently as perhaps they should be used. But whenever we find God sanctifying things, God is saying there's a holy purpose that you have. There's a specific order that things go on. And with the sanctification that we can find with the Holy Spirit, and after Christ has come, the ultimate Redeemer, we find that there is a return back to the function which God has called us to be, which requires a total change in character, a total change in person. And Cain and Abel, they're really on the very front end. They're this first generation of sin, and that's where things get a little bit strange. But we'll go back to Anthony on that.
That does lend credit to what I was going to say next. There are some people who would say that Cain and Abel were the first people. And so, not a mountain or a hill that I would die on, but there is a good argument to be made, because they are the first people who have been born by pain into the fallen world. They really are much more like us than they are like Adam and Eve, and we're more like them than we are like Adam and Eve. And in many ways, they are setting some themes and tones that exist in humanity even to today. And so, in light of that, though, I want us to remember as we read the theme that God sets for creation, which is his blessing and his making it holy. Beyond that, how is it that humanity has been changed? What do these things often look like in real life? Genesis sets Cain and Abel, the first men, as follows in verses 1 and 2 of chapter 4. And it is unbelievable how much is packed within them. Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. Now the man knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have produced a man with the help of the Lord. Next she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a tiller of the ground. Here we're going to take a short break from the scripture. What's really interesting to notice is that Eve praises God for Cain. And this is probably, actually I do think it is the first explicit praise of God in the account of Genesis. And so it's very interesting, especially because this is a praise for Cain, who, I hate to give any spoilers, we all know, commits the first murder later on. Is it an accident that Eve praises for the birth of Cain? I think absolutely not. The birth of Cain is a good thing. He has all sorts of potential. He, just like everybody else, is a human capable of restoration into the image of God. And so I think it's a really, really great thing that that God is praised for the birth of Cain. And I think also Eve is serving as a really great example here. Even though Eve has suffered the consequences of partaking in the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of evil, or in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, she still understands her place in the world, and she knows that it is only by God that she brings anything good into the world, or that she does anything good. And so instead of becoming resentful towards God or something like that, vengeful or hating of the labor that she goes through, as in the birthing of Cain, instead she praises God for it. And I think that's a really, really strong example for us. Another important thing to notice in these verses is the brotherhood of Cain and Abel. And so on a surface level, this seems like a simple sibling rivalry, which is something we can all relate to. And I think that's another really great mark of the story, is that there are very few people who can't understand something like a sibling rivalry. But beyond that, I think that there's something very, very articulate in that Cain and Abel are brothers. Cain and Abel are very much like one another. They're brothers. They're versions of the same potential. There are only so many combinations of two parents. And so in many ways, they only have so much potential between the two, Adam and Eve. And so these are the two versions that we get. They are two sides of the same coin. And in many ways, they are two paths in a fallen world. Oftentimes, again, this is setting themes for the rest of humanity. And so these are the two paths that lie before us. We can tell a lot from plays on words. Abel, his name is like breath, which we also know is already like spirit and like life. And so Abel, his name is representative of some good things. Cain's name is very much like smith. And what is interesting about that is there's lots of different choices, but Cain's name is also very, very similar to the word produce that Eve uses to talk about how she birthed Cain. And that's a very untraditional way of wording that. And so I think it's on purpose that Cain has been placed so close, or the word produce has been placed so closely to the word Cain. And it's making us more and more recognize that Cain is related to the word smithing. And so later on also, we can see Cain's descendant, Tubal Cain. He is a forger of iron and bronze tools. He is literally a blacksmith. And so I think that further supports the idea that Cain's name is supposed to be related to the word smithing. Beyond that, from these verses, we can see two different types of livelihoods. One of the farmer and one of the shepherd. And these are very, very different ways of life and livelihoods. And they're more than just livelihoods as well. These are not just simple trades. And the story is not talking about farmers and shepherds. That's something that needs to be noted. Just because Abel was the one who made the better sacrifice doesn't mean that all shepherds are better than farmers. But what should be noted here are the aspects and qualities that the story is attributing to the characters. And so shepherd is a pretty consistent biblical theme. Jesus was a shepherd, or at least called himself a shepherd. God is related as a shepherd. King David was a shepherd. There's a consistent theme of the leader of God's people being a shepherd. And so shepherds, they have certain qualities. They're loving. They're associated with caring. And this is what the shepherds are portrayed as. A farmer has very, very different qualities from a shepherd. He's situated in his life, and he is using the ground and working the ground as a tool, whereas the shepherd has a more interactive job. He can't just manipulate the animals like some dirt or anything like that. He has to sort of interact with them and get them to do what he wants to do. And he's also got to do a lot of caring for them and roaming around. He's not situated. He's not settled. The shepherd has to follow sort of where the food is for the animals. Whereas the farmer, he's situated. He has a single place. Cain, he is no shepherd. He is the farmer, and his name is related to the word smith. And so these livelihoods, shepherd and farmer, very, very different livelihoods. I think there's even been lots and lots of, since ancient times, quarreling between shepherds and farmers over shepherds who allow their animals to graze on land that isn't theirs, and farmers who want to constrict their land from the shepherds. So this is even more rivalry. Cain is associated here in these verses with three really, really advanced developments. Actually, one of them isn't from this verse. Later on in chapter 4, we find out that Cain is a builder of cities. So not only does Cain have agriculture, basically smith work, and he also has the building of cities. And these are pretty much the three most advanced developments of the ancient world. Shepherding is actually a relatively primitive livelihood. It's close to the hunter-gatherer livelihood. There's lots of roaming around. It's not situated, and it's an older lifestyle. And it's really, really interesting that Cain is associated with these. Abel's lifestyle is very, very humble. Cain, he has a lot to boast for, were he to decide to boast. And so he has impressive marks for the ancient world. Ultimately, these are versions of potentials all found in us. We have the aptitude for being very dedicated protectors who are concerned in family life, and we have the aptitude for being advanced builders and forgers who leave our names on great things that we do and build. However, there is much to be included in these ways of life that we'll see shortly as well. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel, for his part, brought the firstlings of his flock, their fat portions. Cain's offering, it was very, very generic. The only thing that can be said for sure of Cain's offering is that it is from the ground. Abel's offering has very distinct and specific qualities, and these amount to three. Aside from that, the offering is of sheep. The offering is of his flock. Who can say with certainty whether or not Cain's offering came from his ground? It doesn't say in the text. It only says that it came from the fruit of the ground. For all we know, Cain could have just gathered those. Abel brought from his flock, things that he's invested in, things that he has produced and worked for. Beyond that, they are the firstlings of his flock. And this is a really, really big deal to a shepherd. Not only have the firstlings of a flock been waited on for a long time, because as we can imagine, the firstborn of any animal is a very exciting thing, and so to take all of them from a generation and sacrifice them, these have been long waited for, and they're also going to be used for further and further development. Whenever a shepherd has born a generation, it is not as though if he keeps the generation, he will just have the same amount next year. If 5 were born this year, 5 will not be born the next year. If he keeps them all, if 5 were born this year, then there might be 10 or 20 more born next year. And so there's exponential growth there. Huge wealth and security to be had. Abel, he basically sacrifices a season of his life to God. Beyond that, the sacrifice was of their fat portions. This wasn't just their hooves, their bones, or even just their blood. It was the fat portions of the animal, something very, very important to Abel. And so, moving on, picking up in the rest of verse 4. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. And so, something that's really important about the Lord's favor is that it's not just something of preference. I think that's something that gets overlooked. To have the Lord's favor is to have a very, very important blessing. The year of the Lord's favor, the year of Jubilee, is actually associated with freedom, restoration, and righteousness. And so these are very, very big, important things. It's not just as though God is happy for Abel or happy that Abel made a sacrifice. Abel's going to be rewarded, or he has been rewarded. And Cain can see that, as we'll see later on. But for Cain, there was no regard. He's not going to receive this favor. And so why wasn't Cain's offering good? Interestingly, we do get a pretty good explanation for why Abel's offering was good. We get those 3 distinct qualities and that it is of sheep. But for Cain, it's not really made clear. And so there's lots of reasons that we could speculate. Maybe it wasn't his. Maybe it was because the offering was from the ground. or maybe it was because it wasn't the very best of that type of offering. But what I think is really, really interesting is this idea, fides quaerens intellectum, faith in order to understand. Rather than us expecting an explanation from God for whenever we do wrong, we should really have faith and trust in Him. And oftentimes, I don't think that it is explained why something is wrong. Pretty regularly, we get an explanation for why something is good, but rarely do we get an explanation for why something is wrong. And I think there's something really beautiful to that. Rather than doing wrong and expecting an explanation, trying to conform God to our own reason, we should have faith in God, trust in Him, and conform our reason to Him. And from there, I don't believe that God will leave us hanging blindly. I believe that God will restore our sight and make things understandable to us. Interestingly, from both Cain and Abel know to make a sacrifice. And that's something that I think is very strange. Most of the time, the bad guy is all the way bad or something like that. Cain does make a sacrifice here. But these are very different sacrifices. We have to remember, Abel is of a very, very humble character. He does not mind that he is not the most advanced in the world and things of that nature. And he recognizes his place. He knows God is over him, and if he doesn't make the best sacrifice, he's going to fail. Talent is not sin, but it can lead us to think that we are much more special than we are, and it can lead us to have expectations of the world and to think that the world and God owe us something. Cain believes he's very special, and when he sees that Abel has brought his best offering, Cain thinks nothing of it. He continues making his bland and generic offering and doesn't press forward or move in on anything or change what he's doing. He just thinks, all right, well, Abel's going to do that. I'm good enough that I can just make this offering and it'll be acceptable. And that's something else that's really interesting. It does seem that Cain made an offering that he thought was acceptable. So Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. Cain thought that he was in the right. Cain thought that he was going to make the right decision. What else is interesting is that when Cain's faced with the facts, he doesn't change. He doesn't recognize that he's wrong. He just becomes angry and resentful. This is how people are often today. It is a common motto. There are plenty of talented and useless people. And this is not to speak against talent, but oftentimes talent makes us believe that we don't have to work as hard, or that we don't have to make the proper sacrifices, and that we can get by on talent alone. And so I think that Cain is very much in that position. Regardless, there are even more people who think that they're the exception. And so this is the major theme of this biblical study. Don't believe that you're the exception. That won't happen to me. That may be one of the most unwise things that we could ever say or give an excuse for. It's very, very common that people will believe that they don't have to make the best sacrifices for God and what is good. And the very, very huge and obvious problem with that is that in life, whenever you don't make the best sacrifices, you sit back and you make very, very bland and generic sacrifices. Well, then you see others who have less talent than you, who have less of these super awesome advanced ancient skills that you have, like Cain does. And you see others succeeding who are happy, who have what is good in life and have the favor of the Lord, and you become resentful. You become more and more like Cain, and you resent that Abel has what is good. You resent that somebody else does. And I think it's happened to me before. I think it's happened to just about everybody, that we see somebody doing much better than us that we didn't expect, and we get mad about it. I think it's a really, really common human issue. And so Cain has positioned himself in a place ripe for sin's reaping. Moving on to verse 6. And the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it." This is a warning to Cain from God. He has no right to be mad. He should remember that if he does well, he will be accepted. Some translations use the word crouching. And this is the language of a predator. Just like we saw in the Garden of Eden, with the snake, the crafty one, depicted as a serpent, evil here is depicted as a predator, waiting on the threshold, which is something else that's interesting. It is at the opening of your barriers. It is ready to take advantage of your weak point. It's waiting, it's crouching, it's lurking. But worst of all, it's wanting. Sin wants Cain, and it wants you, it wants me, it wants all of us. God tells us, you must master it. This is where we'll end our scripture reading. Who are the Cains of the world, and who are the Abels? I actually think this is a really, really flawed question. I don't think it's so much that there are Cains and Abels in the world. I think that we each have the capacity to be Cain and Abel all the time, each and every time we make a decision. I tell you, my brothers and sisters in Christ, the minute that we believe we cannot become Cain is the very minute that we become Cain. In believing that we cannot become Cain, we believe that we're the exception to these two very, very common ways of life. And that is Cain's probably greatest flaw. Some say that it is pride, but it's a very specific form. It's not just that he is proud of himself. What's interesting is that in making a sacrifice, he shows that he's not ultimately proud. He doesn't think that he's better than God, but he does think that he's the exception. And whenever he gets proven wrong, he doesn't make any changes about it. He still believes he's the exception. And in his anger, he destroys what is a violation of his own thoughts. I believe very much that Abel would have been well aware of the possibility of becoming Cain. I think that this is why he makes the best and right sacrifices. He knows that if he doesn't make these, then he leaves himself in jeopardy. But Dylan, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, Cain and Abel really are a place where you do see two sides of the same potential. I mean, they come from the same gene pool. They could have had a very similar outcome. But yet, Cain and Abel, they go down diverting paths. It almost is something like a split personality, or where you see where two characteristics, they fork off. One goes towards wickedness, the other maintains a bit of a righteous pathway, though we never see fruition of Abel. But one of the things that really is Cain's downfall is that moment when his countenance falls. Because it's something that says his character is morphed fully into that wrong side of the personality, that wrong side of the potential, that wicked pathway. It's actually come into fruition. There's a bit of a transfiguration that happens with him. And he does have this expectation that maybe I thought I was entitled to something which I'm not, which is something that we find when we come to the story. But when you look at Cain, you can also see that it appears that he's convicting himself a little bit. And this is something which a lot of people do when they've actually fallen short of expectations. And again, if Cain's expectations were I'm entitled, therefore I should be approved, whether or not I give effort. When I've always read this story, it appears to me that Cain really isn't applying any effort. I've been around people who do a lot of manual labor and those who just do enough to get by. And it appears to me that Cain, he really just thinks that he can get by. And when he finds out that he's not, instead of that conviction even of the self to say, well, I want to do better, I know my mistakes, a lot of times people will turn that outward. And that's really what Cain does. His countenance falls, his character falls, and he allows that resentment to morph into, well, a hatred for his brother that ultimately ends up with death. Anthony?
I totally, completely agree with that. I think that is a very, very crucial moment. And I think that's also why God comes on the scene at that point as well. It was a very crucial point in Cain's life. And God came to remind him that you must master over this sin that's about to overtake you. Dylan?
Yeah, it's interesting. When God comes to picture, God doesn't actually spend a lot of time talking about the sacrifices at all. It's almost like that's not the whole point. Whether or not you have some extra blessing, you're not entitled to anything. I love this humility that says, if the card I draw is, someone like St. Patrick being carried away to Ireland and then later you're considered illiterate, but you go back anyway, that's the card you draw. But you're entitled to nothing, and everything that you get in life is a gift. And this mentality that says, I have gratitude for every aspect in life. And even God, when he comes to them, he looks at Cain and Abel, and there's no message from God that says, Cain, you didn't give me the right sacrifice, therefore, out of here. You're being sent straight to the bad place. That's not what happens. Whenever Cain's sacrifice is not up to the standard, God comes to him and says, look, I'm not even going to talk to you about the sacrifice at all, but instead, I'm here to warn you that something is crouching at the door. And it's interesting when you see this language of the countenance fallen, because it really does seem to me that Cain, he understands that he's done something wrong. And something is happening. There's a transformation into really a monster that's happening with him. And I know there are a lot of people who always want to say that, oh, he may not be that bad. He kills his brother. He's pretty bad. But sin, it wants him. This predatory thing, it's there. And it all boils back to his character not doing the right thing even when the warning happens. And, it's just really unfortunate. But this is what happens when people, they don't have a mentality of gratitude, when they start thinking they're entitled. As Anthony said all along, this notion that because his name, it's connected with being a smith or a craftsman, someone who's capable of building things, he thinks, well, I must be smart, I must be better than everyone. Well, even if you are, that doesn't mean you're entitled to anything. You still have to work hard, you still have to produce things. And Abel, your brother, he's out there doing his thing, and he's doing his best, he's putting his best foot forward, and God sees that and appreciates that. And when you think you can get by, something's creeping in. Anthony?
Do not try to be the exception. Yeah. Be exceptional, but do not try to be the one who thinks that they are always the exception.
You've got to have a mode of thinking of humility. Always pursue excellence. I mean, the sanctifying process of God says, I have really high expectation, and I want you to aspire to something higher. And there's nothing wrong with aspiring. The problem comes when you get your moral compass jacked up and you say, well, I'm now at the top. I get to decide what is good and what is not good. And that's really where the crookedness comes in.
Well, I think true humility really, really pushes towards self-betterment as well. Who's the more prideful one? The one that says, I'm good just the way I am? Or the one who says, I'm not good enough the way I am. I need to better myself.
Yeah.
Between the two, I've got to say, the one that's seeking self-betterment is the one that is much more humble. It's an explicit recognition that you're not good enough as you are. And so I think that's definitely a huge, huge thing. And I think that's also why Abel makes his very best sacrifice. He knows he's not enough. He's not good enough to take on the world. And he's willing to sacrifice basically a whole season and the best of what he has.
And goodness comes from God. And from what little detail we get in the story, it does seem that Abel recognizes that in giving his best to God, where Cain kind of thinks he gets to be the standard bearer for goodness. And, that happens when people think that they're somehow exceptionally good. Well, anyways, any final thoughts, Anthony, as we wrap up?
I definitely think that whenever you consider this story, just like you can tell where our hearts are by where we place our treasure, you can tell where our faith is by where we make our sacrifices. What are you sacrificing to? Are you sacrificing for yourself, or are you sacrificing to God? And are these sacrifices half-hearted? I think these are all really, really important questions to be asking ourselves while we are striving to take the path which is more like Abel's path, the one which has the favor of God, rather than taking the path that is more like Cain's, which we all know ends with not only losing the favor of the Lord, but also turning and destroying our brother.
Alrighty, and we will wrap things up there. If anyone has any thoughts, questions, or comments, please reach out to us. With that, God love you, and have a blessed day.